Hello everybody, welcome to Ask Rusty Bucket. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already and drop a like on this video. It only takes 1 second and makes a massive difference in how this video performs in the YouTube algorithm, so it is really appreciated. Today's video is going to be a little bit different. I decided just for promotional sake for the new MVP video that we've done over on the main channel that I would put chapter 4 of that video, which is me going through my thought process of predicting this year's MVP. I'd put that out on this channel so you guys can get a taste of that. If you haven't checked it out, see if it would encourage you to watch the actual thing. It's going to be the top link in the description. The first 3 chapters of this thing is like me going over the history of the MVP, the context, and describing my personal philosophy which led to these predictions. That context is important for getting the full grasp of it, so I would encourage you to watch it, but nevertheless, here is the clip. Also, I don't know if I properly emphasized this in the video, I'm making these predictions as predictions, not a pick. So there's a difference between that. I'm not picking who I think should win MVP as much as I'm picking who I think will win MVP. But with that said, without further ado, here's the clip. I hope you enjoy. With the clear frontrunner getting injured, 2024 has become one of the tightest MVP races in recent history. Suddenly, an award that seemed to practically already have someone's name on it is up for grabs. It will be difficult for voters to decide who should be MVP, and regardless of who ends up getting picked, someone's getting snubbed. So bear in mind that I truly made these projections as objectively as possible, as I really don't have a dog in this fight. With that, I've attempted to create an MVP rubric so that we can find out who exactly should win MVP this season. Something we discussed quite a bit was narrative. This is honestly the biggest wild card in this realm, primarily because how much it affects the results seems to shift year to year more than the other pillars, and what that narrative is and how much weight it has is pretty random. Something like Charles Barkley winning over Jordan was due to him being on a new team and Jordan's narrative growing tiresome. Derrick Rose got a leg up because of the hometown hero angle, his preseason speech, and his runner-up being the villain of the league. Russ got a leg up because of the power of his single ladies parable. It's entirely unpredictable. So in the NV pie chart, I am going to give narrative 50% of the split. Then there's numbers. It's pretty simple. You need impressive counting stats. At the bare minimum, it needs to be up to par with the best players in the league, and it's most ideal that it's some of the most impressive numbers in the entire league. So I gave numbers 30% of the split. And last is winning. Now, as we've discussed, there's a complicated relationship between winning and the MVP. It didn't used to be complicated. When the players decided the MVP, respect for their peers was usually predicated on winning. But ever since the media took over the duty of voting on the award, and especially in the last decade, the conversation has dramatically shifted away from winning to the point where it just does not have anywhere close to the same weight that it did before. That said, there's a limit. For example, there was Stephen Curry's 2020-21 season where he had one of the most impressive statistical seasons of his career, and he carried a pitiful Warriors roster that was missing its key players. Now obviously, carry jobs can get you a lot of credit, but not if it's to the 9th seed. Then it's just not gonna cut it. You gotta be a playoff team and thus far, at least the 6th seed. So winning is only getting 20% of the split. Now aside from the chart itself, there are a few simple boxes that must be checked off. You must be the best player on your team. That can't be a question. You must play at least 65 games. You must be a playoff team with an above 500 record. So with that said, here are the top 5 MVP candidates in alphabetical order. Giannis Antetokounmpo, Luka Dončić, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Nikola Jokić, and Jason Tatum. I'm going to look at the 3 pillars of the MVP with all of them and determine how highly they score in each category, which should give us a cumulative score between all of the categories at the end that reveals to us our 2024 MVP. So starting with Luka, on the numbers side, he gets a 30 out of 30. In the winning category, it gets a bit complicated, as his team is currently towards the bottom of the Western Conference playoff race, and the West is notoriously a bloodbath. So we can say that if they fall out of the playoffs, then he becomes effectively disqualified, but presuming he does make the playoffs, it will almost certainly be as a lower seed. Let's say that's like a 6 in winning, you know, maybe an 11 if a miracle happens. And finally, in the narrative category, I'm not gonna lie, the dude's kinda got nothing. And that really goes for basically all of our candidates. Probably the main reason it's so unclear who the MVP is because there isn't a strong narrative through line for anyone, really. Which I guess means all of the narrative talk, which was most of this video, is kind of going to waste, but, you know, whatever. For Luka, he certainly has his stands pushing for him. He also has the potential of being the GOAT, and that's something. But he's really only got that and historic numbers to bolster his name. Otherwise, it's pretty bone dry in the narrative department. He might be carrying his team to the playoffs, but it's not in the theatrical fashion of Russ in 2017, or as helpless as Jokić in 2022, so I'll give him a score of 15 out of 50. So, with using this rubric, he gets an MVP score of 51 out of 100 possible points. Now that looks awful. Moving on to Giannis, his Bucks currently barely have the 5th best record in the NBA at the time of recording this video, so we'll give him a 16 out of 20 in the winning category. His numbers are also pretty excellent, and on the narrative side of things, man, he's got absolutely zero. I honestly feel as though the NBA has forgotten Giannis, at least as it pertains to the MVP race. Since winning in 2020, he's been 4th and 3rd in a few races, where honestly I think he had as good of a case as anyone. But the focus was just on Embiid and Jokić. And as for how Milwaukee has been covered this year, the focus is almost exclusively on how disappointing they've been. Not to mention with him having 2 MVPs, not that they're that recent, but it's recent enough for there to still be some voter fatigue present. Almost like he had his time in the spotlight and now it's time to move on to new things, like he's got to do even more to enter the exclusive club of guys with 3 or more MVPs. The irony of all this being that Giannis' best seasons are not even his MVP seasons. I'd argue this has been his best individually, it's definitely been his best statistically, but when the narrative isn't on your side, it is damn near impossible to win. It's technically possible that the Bucks don't lose the rest of the season, but even then, it would take Giannis carrying them in the absence of help like Damian Lillard for there to be any sort of narrative momentum for him. So I'm going to give him a 5 out of 50 on narrative, which is definitely going to tank his score. He ends up with 48 MVP points. Speaking of 2-time MVPs, let's move on to Jokić. On the numbers side, I'm going to give Jokić a 27 out of 30, just like with Giannis. Where the hell's... oh boy. His scoring average is a little low versus the field, but he's less than 1 assist away from a triple-double average on +7 relative true shooting, including the inefficient start he had to the season, so I'd say he's pretty close to as good as it gets. On the winning end of things, the Nuggets are tied for the best record in the Western Conference and the 2nd best in the NBA, so I'm going to give them an 18 out of 20 on winning. Narratively with Jokić, we're kind of in a weird spot. Him being a defending champion is helping his case. Now that he's proved himself on that stage, people are less likely to bitch and moan if he did win the award. And because he didn't win MVP in 2023, there's the angle that he was robbed and should have three-peated, so there's almost the makeup MVP to be had here. I don't think anyone of this group strongly has a narrative on their side, but for the first time, I think Jokić might actually have it on his side. So I'm going to give him a 25 out of 50 on narrative, which is not a lot, but it's pretty up there for these candidates. This gives Jokić a now leading total MVP score of 70. Now let's talk about Jason Tatum. Oh boy, if anyone's lost recently in the court of public opinion, it's Jason Tatum. Mostly for the crime of being on an insanely stacked team in Boston. Nobody on this list has anywhere near the help that Tatum does. But at the same time, he's also the best player on an insanely good Celtics team, so he has the winning on his side. So he immediately gets a full 20 out of 20 in winning. What I hate about all this is this looks so sloppy. And I'm like so good at fucking drawing. But this is just not the right environment for being good at it at all. +1 bonus point for being the best player on the best team. Because why not, you know? As far as his numbers are concerned, he is easily the weakest of the group. Like, everyone except Nikola Jokić scores more points. All of them average more assists. Everyone but Shai averages more rebounds. He's tied with Luka for the lowest block average. He averages the least amount of steals. He has the lowest true shooting percentage. Basically, he ain't got numbers on his side. But 27, 8, and 4 ain't nothing, especially with how much help he has. So I'll somewhat generously give him a 15 out of 30. Narratively, I really think he's getting pushed and pulled in many different directions as of recently, but as a whole, I think NBA fans and media are more or less lukewarm on him, but he has the Beantown media mafia on his side. So I'm going to give him a 25 out of 50 on narrative with +1 for being in Boston, which results in 58 MVP points. And last but not least, we have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Shai doesn't have the most insane stats, but they're pretty up there. Something I think has gone undermentioned quite a bit is that the guy is averaging 3 stocks as a guard. Where he gains a lot of points is in his efficiency, as he has a 65% true shooting percentage. He's also statistically having the most efficient slashing season of any guard ever. No guard literally ever scores more in the paint than SGA this year. So I'm going to give him a 23 out of 30 on numbers. And as for the winning department, OKC has the best record in the Western Conference and the second best in the NBA, being just a handful of games behind the Boston Celtics at the time of recording. Let's call that a 19 out of 20, especially for how they shattered expectations. Now, narratively speaking, I think SGA is in a pretty good spot, all things considered. Like I said, no one has a strong narrative pull this year, but Shai might have it the most on his side. The main reason for this really being his team in general. OKC is one of the hottest topics in the league this year. Calling back to the 1993 MVP, Charles Barkley's Suns were the league's up-and-coming team that also happened to have the best record in the West. And this worked in his favor for winning that MVP over Michael Jordan. There's also a lot of buzz around the league about crowning the NBA's next face of the league, and Shai is very much a candidate for that. And while he has good teammates, none of them even flirted with being an all-star this year. So I'm going to give him a 30 out of 50 in narrative. Because, again, at the end of the day, it's not a super strong narrative by any means. SGA is the best player on a young team on the rise who's ahead of schedule, but he's not quite the NBA's definitive main character this season. But that totals out to 72 MVP points, which narrowly puts Shai over Jokić, meaning that your 2024 MVP will be Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. With Nikola Jokić coming in second place, Tatum getting third place just because he gets a seat at the table being the best player on the best team, Luka Dončić in fourth place because he just does not have a winning or narrative on his side, as ridiculous as his stats may be, and Giannis getting last place because narratively it seems we've forgotten him. Now, it's plenty possible that the voters all collude to make the MVP great again and decide that winning is the most important thing like in the past, making a case like Jason Tatum feel a little closer to first than third. Maybe Luka or Jokić make a campaign for it on social media out of nowhere and average a triple-double for the rest of the season. Maybe Giannis goes undefeated like I said earlier, but I doubt any of that's going to happen. Now finally, after however long this video is, to finally answer the question posed by the original title, what the fuck is the MVP award?